Thank you for having us BSidesAugusta. We'd like to start off with a question. Do any of you watch The Real Housewives of Silicon Valley? No, great. Well, our presentation is nothing like that. So we're going to start off. I'm going to have my friend here, Mr. Daniel Adamitis, start us off. If you have any questions, feel free to ask because your microphones aren't being recorded. If you ask us a question, we're going to have to repeat it so everyone can hear it. It's not that we're slow or that we're just slow. Right? All right.
How do we project? Thank you.
Who likes this slide deck, huh?
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for coming out this morning. First off, can everyone in the back hear me? Just a quick check. Cool. Awesome. Thanks, guys. So as stated previously, my name is Danny. This is David, and we work for Cisco Talos. So for those of you who are not familiar with Cisco Talos, we are part of the security business group within Cisco. So I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with Cisco. We're kind of famous for routers. We make endpoint AV. We do email telemetry. We have an endpoint antivirus engine. We obviously come out with Snort. We just came out with Snort 3, I think 2 weeks ago. So that's really exciting. Yay for multi-threading. And we have a number of security products like that. So as a Talos member, it's kind of our job to feed through all these different telemetry sources, such as these, to help find some adversaries and threats to various networks. That's kind of one of our really cool things about Cisco is we have so many different products from the Meraki wireless access points, the endpoints, to the firewalls. It kind of gives us a really cool viewpoint into certain networks if we have all these things in place. That allows us to be able to comb through all these telemetries and kind of string together some of these attacks a lot easier than traditional computer security products, which may only have an antivirus type engine or a firewall or just email telemetry. So as you can see, we have a number of things. We incorporate all of this, and that allows us to make some really cool reports and some really cool findings that we're going to tell you about now.
But first, before we do that, we have some giveaways. And we're going to ask a question and give away an item. Does anyone know, or can anyone guess, what technology none of these talks were, none of these cases we're highlighting today have to do with? I'm going to give you a clue. It's the opposite of wired. Who's the first one to say that? Who's the first one to say wireless? Raise your hand. You, sir. You win some stuff.
A wireless indoor panel. Congratulations.
Who are the sponsors of these items? We would like to thank them.
We'd like to thank our lovely sponsors, Unnamed Company 1.
So let's start with VPNFilter. If you haven't heard of it, where were you? It was all the rage in May. It was such the rage, I had to spend half my May in the Ukraine. Wow, that sounds like fun. It really, really was. So VPNFilter was a piece of malware that we discovered on Soho routers, Soho being small office, home office routers. And Danny will walk you through kind of the workflow of this interesting and multicolored diagram.
Yes, so for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, this was an advanced piece of malware that was actually a little different in that it was targeting these Soho routers. One of the reasons we believe this was so particularly effective is because, as you guys know, most networks don't actually monitor these edge devices. There is no antivirus for a router. There's really no precedent for people to start checking these routers. As long as it's doing what it's supposed to do, they kind of just seem to forget about them and they lay in the background. But the very important thing is that they route all of your traffic. So if you were to hypothetically compromise this device, as was done in this case, they would have unfair access to everything. And in some cases, they were actually able to use this to move further into the network to gain additional access to like workstations, servers, and things like that. So as previously stated, here's kind of the workflow we came up with. This was...
Well, wait. We didn't come up with this. The adversary came up with it. We just documented it.
We wrote about it. So we originally found our sample actually on VirusTotal. At the time, it was hanging out there, I think, for what, a year or two? And it was just it wasn't being flagged by anyone, so they just assumed it was benign. And then once we started analyzing this, it seemed that they were exploiting these routers in some sort of automated fashion. To this day, we still don't actually know how they were being compromised, but just based off the breadth, we're assuming that they could be doing something like just scanning for default admin credentials through something like Shodan. There was a number of vulnerabilities that existed for these types of routers, such as MikroTik, and as we kind of mentioned before, people seem to forget about these edge devices. So they're extremely vulnerable, and if they're never patched, it presents the opportunity and the weakness to gain entry to that network. So once this router gets exploited through some sort of unknown means, it then installs this first stage. And this first stage is extremely persistent and can live past reboot. So even if something were to go down or if it gets shut down, it can spin right back up again and regain access to that network. Once it actually starts there, it then tries to find its command and control server in order to get a second stage implant downloaded. So one of the things that was actually really unique about this is that it makes a request actually to fill the bucket and actually downloads an image. So if you were kind of a network admin, you might say, all right, maybe it's just one of my employees who's kind of, doing some kind of social media stuff, or it's just maybe if it's from a PR department that could be a legitimate your purpose, and it would never really go recognized. And then once it downloads that image and the XF file data, they actually have an IP address embedded in there. So it looks like a normal image. It's something that would ever raise suspicion, but within that metadata, that's how they were then able to obtain that IP address. If that was unable to work for some reason, maybe they have some filtering in place to block these social media sites, and then has a hard-coded IP address they can try to communicate to in order to download that second stage. That second stage that was hard-coded was called toknowall.com. So that would then allow them to find one of their update servers, and then it would then try to download a second stage implant, which would then communicate via Tor, and it would have a number of plugins. And Dave actually reversed some of them, so I'll let him talk about that.
But before we do that, the title of our talk today is called To Notify All. It is an actual joke from the C2 domain to know all, which
it's not good.
When we took a look at it, and it's kind of brazen for an adversary to have a domain like To Know All as a C2 domain. I mean, it's kind of ballsy. We thought it was a joke at first. Turns out it was a joke, so we named our talk To Notify All as an homage to that. But some of the modules that could be downloaded by a second and third stage involved a lot of man-in-the-middle activities, particularly the ability to apply SSL strip and force SSL downgrading on most websites that were going through these routers. So even if you thought you were connecting to a legitimate secure site, it would force a download and then be able to inject a JavaScript payload into your response, causing the adversary to be able to exploit your router. Another tool that was used in place was a binary replacement tool. So if it looked like it was downloading anything that had an exe, any type of binary, it could actually replace it with a Trojan version that would then execute when it got to the victim machine. So these were all about compromise and lateral movement in these small and medium-sized networks. So this obviously very bad. So what we were hoping to do here were kind of give you a bunch of short overviews of things that you may have heard about in press, but talk a little bit about things that you may not have known. For instance, if you Google VPNFilter and look in May of 2017, you'll find there's a lot of people who have QNAP SANS devices that were talking about it repeatedly, and they thought it was a crypto miner. The footprints of VPNFilter have been pretty much available for 3 years, but nobody ever actually took time to look at or put it together what it actually meant. And that was something that actually completely shocked me when we looked at the scope and the depth of this attack, how people had talked about it for years, but nobody said, oh, we should look into this specifically. Everybody assumed it was a part of a Mirai botnet. Turns out it wasn't. So that is VPNFilter. Also, as Danny mentioned a little earlier, one of our biggest problems with this was there's not a lot of good forensic capabilities for routers, meaning that if you find a router and you lose power on it, the first and second stage would just go away, which means that we'd really have to take the router apart and basically solder JTAG on and download the firmware, download the memory while it was running, be able to analyze the image. And at some point, we even had a plan to splice a power cable and splice a running generator, a running battery into it so we could unplug it from the wall and it would stay up, and we'd be able to move it back to our office for further analysis. We never actually had to do that, but we did have a plan for it. And if you want to take a look real quick, these are the countries that were affected by VPNFilter. I'm not sure if you're a fan of geopolitics. I know I'm not, but it looks like there are certain places that just get hit more than others. For instance, it doesn't look like Panama really is that affected. Kind of a little bit maybe, but not, right? Cuba's got no VPNFilter. That's strange. Let's just stare at this for a second and ponder what this could mean. Well, we're done pondering. So our part of this investigation was to find clients that were infected by this. And this actually, when I was originally given this assignment, said no problem, easy peasy, we'll have them all for you tomorrow. Turns out it's a lot harder than we thought. So we actually had a brilliant data scientist named Nate Winslow who came up with a way of doing a time frequency analysis and mapping the behavior to decibels. So on your x-axis here, that's a logarithmic lookup in decibel with a frequency along the bottom of time. So we were able to build, and if you look at this, you can kind of see a rising line that sticks out right in the middle throughout the slide. This is how we were able to figure most clients using not only Cisco internal telemetry, but partner telemetry and third-party feeds as well. We were able to put together a victim list of machines that were infected with it. And we would see repeated patterns like a machine we were sure would be compromised with like a stage 2 of this attack. It would power cycle for some reason, whatever reason. It seemed about every 3 weeks a device with it on it would power cycle. So, you know, you would get used to it going off and coming back on. Now, when it came back on, it would act like it was stage 1 for a little while. In some cases, as little as 2 hours. In some cases, as much as 4 days, before being promoted back to a second stage attack. And this is what allowed us, this graph is what really was a breakthrough. So we were able to take time frequency analysis, which you don't hear a lot in cyber work. The guy that did it for us is a geologist. He has his PhD in geology, and he loves time frequency analysis. So here we go. We got to use it in cyber.
So just to hit on that, this is kind of another technique that we used really effectively with this campaign, but could be used for other companies as well, or other researchers. Is what we were trying to measure is the frequency and the rate at which something would beacon out. So if something beacons out every, well, say 30 seconds, or maybe it's every 6 hours, you can kind of get a map of this always occurs at this time zone, and you can kind of run some analytics to say, hey, is there any other domains that we see are being requested at the same frequency or within the same kind of time frame like that? And if so, could that potentially be maybe a similar domain that's used in another operation by that same group? Or could that maybe be some sort of backup domain to kind of help unravel more of the mystery behind it and discover additional infrastructure?
Any questions? Anything you ever wanted to ask about VPNFilter but never had people to ask? We're right here. I was hoping it would be you.
So I saw a little mention of like it was a PowerShell in this stage 2 kind of malware when we had the process slide.
Oh, I think it was a packet sniffer.
Oh, packet sniffer. Oh, never mind.
You're good.
I was wondering if it actually had kind of like endpoint distribution capabilities.
We believe that there are endpoint distribution capabilities and modules that we don't have the code for.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Are JTAG interfaces usually disabled on Soho routers?
Our JTAG interface is usually disabled on Soho routers. It depends on the router. Sometimes, if you get lucky and it's a strangely manufactured router put together by spare parts, it probably isn't. But it's one of those things where if you've hit a brick wall, it's This is the only thing you have to move forward. So you hope they don't.
I think there's one more. So the question was, if we know the purpose or kind of the intent behind this particular campaign, if it was financially motivated, if it was motivated by maybe some sort of espionage for a nation state. I'll let David answer.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
We believe, based on the code that we found in the malware, we believe that based on the amount of effort that the adversary went to confuse attackers, we also believe, based on the secondary and tertiary follow-up modules, that this was an implant designed for espionage. So think about that: 500,000 small home routers compromised for an espionage-like adversary, which would mean, why attack the company if you can just grab people's credentials when they're at home? Yes, sir.
Did you guys find that when you guys showed the attack map, was there any reason that you guys were able to find like kind of focused in the Mediterranean area, like around Italy and Greece?
The question is, when we found the attack map, was there any reason that it seems to be heavily focused around Italy and Greece? I'd like to point out again, we did not corroborate with the adversary on this. So,
Unfortunately, any sort of thing about motives behind that would just be our speculation, and we try to avoid speculating just because we are not the adversary and we do not know what they were trying to do.
now, if you wanted to get a beer later and hear our wild theories, right? There's this whole thing about aliens, right? But that doesn't seem to have any supporting evidence whatsoever. I'd like to point out the aliens theory has no supporting evidence. However,
It doesn't stop David from saying it.
that's the stuff. That's funny you say that. That is exactly what we did, and that was kind of the point we were going for here. It seemed like they were attacking everybody with broadband infrastructure.
All right, we'll do
Yes,
one
sir.
more question, and then I think we have to continue on. So, last one.
Where was the number all registered at? And where was the home IP address?
Mr. Adamitis?
So I believe, so when we kind of did some trace routes, we believe it was associated with an OVH server located in France. If you guys see connections to an OVH server that uses a LuxEncrypt certificate, you should be weary.
And that's just in general. That's got nothing. That's not just for this case.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to give away something else now. Who knows what Cisco Smart Install is? All right, well, I'm going to have to ask a simpler question then. Who knows what Cisco is? All right. Cisco makes an operating system. What is it called? iOS. Who's the first person somewhere over here? You win some blue team handbooks, because if you have Cisco gear in your environment, you should probably know about blue teaming. I don't think that's a good advertisement, but
That was not endorsed by the company.
that was not endorsed by the company. I'm sorry. All right, so what is Cisco Smart Install? And I gotta be honest, I've been in this business for 20 years, right? I've been doing security for as long as I've been able to drink beer. And if you told me 20 years ago, Cisco would have this thing where you could basically deploy it once and it would set up all of your Cisco equipment without you logging in or touching anything or even knowing passwords, I would be horrified and I would be shocked. And a younger, somewhat more malicious version of myself would not be able, I could not contain myself, because I would then be able to set up like a Quake server. Not Quake 3, we're talking about the original Quake, right? And I could not wait for that. However, it turns out that for some reason, we have this capability. If you can read the setup there, but it's a plug-and-play configuration and in image management, which means that, hey, if you're a really good attacker and you'd like to backdoor this iOS image, you can do that, and it will get deployed to everywhere on your ASA or ASR 9000, and it would be almost impossible for anyone to find it. So it's a smart install, plug-and-play configuration. Image management provides zero touch. And as a security person, the phrase zero touch should make you upset, because zero touch also is synonymous with things like passwordless, default login, right? Zero touch is not good. Zero touch deployment for new switches. So we're not just talking about like MikroTik firewalls here or Windows boxes you can take off the network. We're now talking about Cisco switches that there's not a lot of good forensics information in the world about them. You pretty much have to call us to do forensics. And also, no one knows what they look like when they're doing bad things. We have so many protocols on our routers. And you're like, oh, God, it's sending out something weird on a UDP port. No, that's Cisco Discovery Protocol. That's supposed to be there.
And the other thing to note is that this affects also the routers. So while this may go after the switches, typically you have those sitting behind your firewall, so they tend to be a little bit safer. But if you have a big Cisco router working at the ISP level, that could also be vulnerable to the same type of attack. And as you guys know, if you start going after ISPs and things like that, you can cause a lot of damage very, very quickly.
And this is my favorite sentence of the entire thing. You can ship a switch to a location, place it in the network, power it on with no configuration required on the device. Now, I don't know about you, but for a long time I did penetration testing where I would do things like ship switches to places and give instructions for people on how to plug them in, claiming I was from their supplier. And they would do it. But I would always get burned on the having to provide phone support, right? Like, I would have to walk them through iOS CLI stuff. It's not fun. But then you bring something like this, and I literally feel like I'm the GRU. I can just ship something to you. You plug it in, I own you. There's none of that in-between stuff. So, if we really haven't sold it here, Cisco Smart Install is a big deal for us at Cisco, right? There's all kinds of capabilities you can do with it, and you can read them, but some of the things we've seen, we have literally seen people log into routers, change running configs, change their boot images, change the configure script with the script that will TFTP down and config. And the scary part about this is we didn't have any prior knowledge of this. We literally just went through Shodan to find these. And the rule of thumb is if it's on Shodan, it's exploitable. Say it with me. If it's on Shodan, it's exploitable. That's really what we'd like you to take away from this talk. How did it begin? So we like to talk about sexy stuff, like hard, reverse engineered, like bloody in the network knife fights with an adversary that we spent a lot of time on. This was none of that. We had a partner go, hey, do you know what these IP addresses are? And we were like, no. They're like, they're Cisco Smart Install devices out on the internet. Do you know what Cisco Smart Install is? And I was like, yeah, I mean, it's a smart way to install.
It's a lovely feature.
It's a lovely feature. They then briefed us on what was being done with these, and we're like, oh dear, we have to tell somebody. So Talos itself doesn't handle these types of vulnerabilities. We have to go to a group called PSIRT, or a product security group, who handles all of Cisco's product security vulnerabilities. So obviously we walked in a very respectful manner to PSIRT, and by that I mean we ran with hands in the air, like screaming.
Did you want to do a demonstration?
I would, but I'm just not feeling manly enough for that.
Okay.
But so this started in 2017, and PSIRT did an advisory on it, and they were like, "Oh, this is bad, like capital bad. You shouldn't run this anymore." So this guy, Matt Only, if you don't follow him on Twitter, but do like rage fests every once in a while, this is a great guy to follow. We tried to get a picture of him green, raging about this, but he refused to have his picture taken for this presentation. But he even, at the point, and remember, all of us work for Cisco. So he was like, come on, turn this off. This isn't a big deal. And then a bunch of news stories came out about how there were people with default root in Cisco. And you would expect us to go, no, it's not default root. It's just some miscommunication. We went the other way and went, it's worse than default root. There's a lot of things you can do with this you can't do with root. Turn it off right now.
And then this is kind of the big case we wanted to hit on was, I'm not sure if you guys have heard about this one, but actually this happened in Russia, I believe, where they actually had a number of Cisco routers.
Hey, I didn't think we were allowed to say Russia in Augusta.
Oh. There was a big ISP in an unnamed country that spans 9 time zones, and they love to use Cisco routers as some of their backbone ISPs. As a result, we woke up one morning and we discovered a number of Cisco routers were being exploited via this feature that was embedded in some of the products. As a result, they were then able to gain access to a number of these devices, and they basically deleted their router config files. For those of you who are familiar with that, it basically renders the router completely inoperable. And this was a very big deal in that this was something that we were kind of yelling into the void. And I know this is sometimes other people, who are doing open source work discovered this really critical vulnerability, and you're trying to tell people about this and how serious it is, and that if you don't do this, it's going to be the end of times, and it just falls upon deaf ears until someone finally hears you, but it's the wrong audience. And then what they do is they would then use this vulnerability, or this feature, if you will, and they can use this to basically shut down internet routing for an entire country for, I think, what was it, half a day, where there was just, you were not able to access the internet. You were not able to do anything. And as you can imagine, if you're some sort of business and you have a downtime of 24 hours, that can cost a substantial amount of money. And this was something where they couldn't even fix it. They had to try to call their ISP, but then the ISP started getting flooded with phone calls about saying, hey, my internet's not working, and it just perpetuates this really bad cycle.
And the worst part was we would get, our outreach team would talk to reporters about this, and it would get described as a vulnerability, as if there was a patch coming. Well, it's protocol abuse. There was no patch coming. This is exactly what some engineer that we have not met, but we're currently looking for, intended to have happen. So while a lot of people were waiting for a patch to make their smart install work well, we kept telling them you have to turn it off. There is no working well. And active exploitation. Oh, by the way, the gentleman that's tweeting in the upper right-hand corner, Omar Santos, is one of the leads in our product security group. So if Omar says something is bad, that's by definition a bad thing. Any questions about Smart Install? The question is, if it was so easy to use in zero touch, why would Cisco develop that capability and allow it to fall into the wrong hands? It was developed to work on intranet devices. You were never supposed to have these devices facing the internet, capital internet. It turns out a lot of people were, even against our best guidance. It was kind of a not best use case scenario. You know how like a lot of people want to push best use cases? This was a not best use case scenario.
So I think the original idea was that sometimes you have these big companies and they have understaffed IT departments, or they have people who aren't as familiar with proprietary Cisco command line interfaces or things like that. So they wanted to provide some sort of solution that they can give to the average user where he or she could then just plug in that router, and in about 5 minutes they can get that up and running. And the idea was that, again, this would work great if you're on the intranet, your internal network, and you're hidden behind a firewall. Again, at that point, you're pretty safe. It was just, unfortunately, some people were taking this device that was developed for an internal resource and using it externally, and that's where that then presented this issue.
That was a great question, and for that, you're going to get a gift certificate to Safari Books, one of my favorite book providers.
They're awesome. I use them all the time. I was reading them on the plane.
I was literally just about to ask that question before you did. Congratulations.
Cool. All right, so I think we have time for maybe another story or two. So the next thing we wanted to talk about was Coin Hoarder. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this thing, we're going to do a quick overview, and then we're going to tell some of the lovely stories.
We also have a dance that we're going to, it's an interpretive dance of how great Bitcoin, no?
I mean,
No, okay, never mind. Coin Hoarder was the internal name we had for an investigation that started a little over 3 years ago, or a little, and it was made public about 8 months ago. It was a joint research effort between Talos and a gentleman named Jeremiah O'Connor, who's actually the hero of this story, and I wish he could be here with us today, but he's off being awesome with Bitcoin elsewhere. He actually brought me this investigation and says, hey, check this out. I wrote a machine learning tool that will take domains and look for phishing variants of them. Like, apple.com, right? It would be a 3 instead of a P, so you get ap3le.com. I think that's how you spell it. So phishing works specifically well on me because I can't spell anyway. So we were trying to figure out exactly what they were doing, and we watched these guys, and we have partners all over the world. One of the partners we work with, the Ukraine National Police and their cyber unit, and they heard about this. And true story, at the time, it was not illegal to steal Bitcoin in the Ukraine. There was no law against Bitcoin theft because it wasn't a real thing.
it was never developed before. No one cared about it.
So Dan's going to explain this slide to you because I'm old and I still don't get it.
So this is one of the funny things is at the time we actually released this report, I think it was actually February, there was a famous story about the Bitcoin pizza. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, some of the original Bitcoin people will reminisce about the good old days when they had all these Bitcoins, but they were essentially worthless. And one of the funny stories is at one point, some guy actually bought 2 Papa John's pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoins. So at the time, he thought this was a really good deal because he didn't think this was going anywhere, and he's like, I might as well cut my losses and see what I can get now. Fast forward to 2018, where you guys know a Bitcoin was worth, what, approximately $16,000 per Bitcoin times 10,000? So there was the internet being the internet, decided it'd be really funny if they made fun of this guy and created a Twitter account and they tweeted out the value of those 2 pizzas every single day. And this was the value of those pizzas on the day that we released our reports.
$109 million.
Yes. I hope you enjoyed those pizzas.
They're Papa John's pizzas. How good could they be? Wait, we don't have Papa John's fans here, do we?
Okay. So as was previously mentioned, they developed these algorithm to help look for these typo-squatted domains that would look like a legitimate service. And originally the idea was, can we use this on some of our products, such as endpoints, to look for weird connections to a URL? Can we run this over some of our email telemetry to see, hey, can we use this to potentially find, these spear phishing domains and block them before the user ever has a chance to click on them? And then what we did is we kind of just have one of our internal clusters, and we said, all right, let's turn this algorithm on and see what it finds, and it'll kind of give us our output into another directory. So we kind of let that run in the background, I think, for a little bit, and we came back and we saw that it was hitting on these weird stuff in Google, and we're like, well, that's weird. Google is clearly correct, and we were kind of, wondering what could possibly happen, and then we noticed these AdWords, and this is where they were actually purchasing. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Google AdWords, if I can do a quick 2-minute overview. So I'm sure everyone's familiar with Google, and maybe you want to order a pizza. So you go into google.com and you'll type in the word pizza, and then it'll give you the top results based off their ranking algorithm. Well, one of the things you can also do is purchase what they're calling an AdWord. So what that does is that basically promotes your search engine or your search website to be at the very top of the page. So if you were to type in pizza, and I'm in Augusta and I own a local pizza shop, I can try to promote my website in order to get more business. What they were doing is they were buying these words such as blockchain or Bitcoin exchange or things like that. They would try to purchase the actual legitimate one and then different variants that could have been factored by users. So when they click on this, they were kind of preying on them and assuming that they weren't going to actually look through everything. They're just going to say, okay, top result, click here. And that's what they were doing. And this is 2 of the examples we were able to discover in the wild.
And those are the actual ones that Jeremiah were able to discover, right? And if you do some lookups on it, you'll see quickly registered to hundreds of thousands of hits in like less than a day. That's an unusual indicator for us doing analysis.
And I should note that this was just from our open DNS data feed, which is less than 5% of all internet activity. So just kind of keep that in mind that this is less than 5%. And that was still.
Danny said that wrong. It's up to as much as 5% of the internet activity. This is what the real site looks like. No, actually, I got that wrong. This is the phishing site. This is why these work so well. This is the phishing site. So you're probably wondering how we were able to do this. We worked with local law enforcement, and we were able to watch that box very closely. And we came up with something very strange. The people that were running the scam did not seem to know anything about code, servers, or whatnot. At one point, they even hard-coded their home ISP IP address into a config file for a firewall rule. So it made it very easy for the Ukrainian police to find them. But the code itself was all automated. All they needed you to do was click on one of those ads and go to one of these spun up sites that looks real, and it would transfer all your wallet information out. We figured by the end of it, there was something close to $50 million worth of Bitcoin in February Bitcoin money. It was stolen. It's worth, I think, 18 to 19 cents now. But at the time, Bitcoin was doing well. I'm joking about the 18 to 19 cents. It's at least $20.
2 pesos.
So you're wondering how could we stop this, right? And Cisco, we couldn't. We had to go to Google, and this is a result. We actually got Google to stop accepting AdWords for cryptocurrencies while they tried to work out a solution for this. At this time, they don't really have a good solution. They're working on it any day now. So if you guys want to collectively join me in holding my breath, it will any day now be ready to go again. Don't hold your breath. Don't tell anyone someone in a speech told you to hold your breath, waiting for Google. We'll all die. So who's heard of Olympic Destroyer? Did it destroy your Olympics experience? No, it didn't really destroy anyone's Olympic experience. And that was the problem. As I'm not a big fan of the Olympics. It messes with my normal television schedule. But Dan had actually just started working at Cisco when this happened. A member of our European, 2 members of our European outreach team were researching this and found it and were able to publish it quickly long before anyone else knew it was a thing. And it had some basic, very similar workflow to VPNFilter, but different targets. It would inject a winlogon.exe process with either WMI or BSidesAugusta, and it would be able to scan an IP subnet or do ARP lookups for other machines at it. It would then compromise it and move on. Olympic Destroyer could do a lot of what all the other malware that we've been talking about can do. It'd steal credentials from your browser. It would steal stuff. Stealer? I'm going to have to ask Mr. Adamitis about that.
I think that was supposed to be system stealer.
Well, I like Steeler. Right? That makes you think that you're going to go to a football game with the Steelers versus the Pats, and they're just gone.
Yeah.
The Russians have stolen the Steelers. Patch, so it would actually patch WinLogin and show discovery credentials. It had a wiping capability, much like Nyteya, or the Black Energy malware from 2016. And it could run BSidesAugusta and connect to additional boxes with it. Pretty standard stuff, and nowadays we have a more deep belief that these are all part of a larger campaign being perpetrated by a particular actor.
So the one thing to know about this is it was so particularly effective because it was a worm that was released in the wild. Traditionally, when you have these sorts of operations, you actually have some sort of person or a group of people interacting with these things to try to grab some information. This one, they kind of just, they let it go wild, and then they basically just stepped away from it and let them do its thing. And that's why I was just able to continuously try to go from one computer to the next computer and it was just wiping the master boot record, which would basically make the system inoperable.
And that brings us to Bad Rabbit. Now, looking at this GIF, do you get the feeling that this is a mischievous and or bad rabbit? Yeah. Yeah.
This is why I don't do graphics. Mine won't even be that good.
We don't do the graphics. We can barely do the spelling. So this a very similar propagation. It would create a fake file called infopub.dat, and it would scan port 139 internally. So it would get in originally via spear phishing, and once it would get a foothold, it would be able to scan internally port 139, looking for additional credentials or opportunity to laterally move. Anybody know what the name of MS-170101 is? Eternal Blue. That's why we felt the rabbit should have been blue, but apparently we don't know what we're talking about. But after being able to scan for everything it could internally, it would then use Eternal Blue to try to move laterally. So while this is interesting, we have one more thing to talk about, which is actually funny. And we'll be able to take questions on this after the presentation. Who's heard of Ccleaner? All right, Ccleaner was amazing. I'm going to tell you a true story that we tapped around a little bit about in the media, but we never ever really revealed internally. We have a host-based endpoint tool called AMP, right? It runs on your host. It looks for all this type of nasty endpoint malware, right? We actually were in the process of rolling out new functionality, and you know, if you've ever had to write software, new functionality means bugs, lots and lots of bugs. So we got a binary from a partner that's like, hey, we're running your beta version. And it keeps flagging on this. And we looked at it, it was signed correctly, and it was from Avast as part of the Ccleaner install family. So we went, like most normal people would, all right, where did our tool break? We spent 3 days, and I cannot even begin to analyze how much manpower was spent on trying to figure out what about our tool was broken. It turns out our tool was not broken at all. It turns out our tool was telling us exactly what it was supposed to do. That Ccleaner binary was indeed backdoored. So you could have knocked us all over with a feather, and there was some really colorful language. There may have been a chair thrown.
Yeah, that thing stopped a whole team from working 72 straight hours to find a bug in some sort of a logic, and multiple cases being escalated to us for being like, why are we flagging on false positives? And
there was
great time.
To say there's a kerfuffle going on would be minor. There was a bit of a misunderstanding. But when we finally figured it out, it was actually pretty easy to understand. We were able to work with partners to get the list of C2 a copy of the C2 server was downloading, and we found that while stage 1 was prevalent, the second stage that would download, you'd have to be on a specific whitelist from a specific domain, and those domains were high-tech companies like Cisco,
Microsoft,
Samsung, Microsoft. Yeah. You had to be from one of those companies to get the vaulted domain. Thankfully, us being Cisco, we were able to get a second piece of the malware pretty easily for additional reverse engineering. So just in the future, if you're writing APTs, don't naturally include companies that have their own built-in APT research teams as people that should be able to get second stage malware downloads. But that's neither here nor there. The story that I want you to take away from this is that we built the tool to flag this. We deployed it, but we did not trust it. The first hint of problems, we said, oh, well, it must be a tool mistake. And we spent 72 hours and who knows how many man hours trying to find that mistake. If you don't trust the tools that you're using, you shouldn't be using them. And that was a lesson that we had to learn, even for ourselves, the hard way. Any questions? Yes, ma'am. Whoop, whoop. Wait, there was a what kind of bug?
There's a huge chance that it could be bug. And when I looked more in depth online, what it does say that it has a bug.
Does anybody remember the story that Avast gave for why that happened? Apparently, Ccleaner was bought from a standalone company and integrated into Avast's product line, and they said that the guys who did that were now leaving to start their own new company to do the same thing, and they had bugged Ccleaner to advertise for their new company. That's so crazy, I can't even say it without really laughing. I mean, it doesn't look like I'm laughing, but boy, am I laughing. But you're absolutely right. Ccleaner is something that traditionally could be bugged, and that was around the beginning of the third day when people started asking, well, what if it's Ccleaner and not the known good binary that we've been, because for the first day, we actually had no idea really what the binary was. We just knew it was a binary and it was a false positive. And it wasn't until the beginning of the third day that people started going, what is this? And somebody said it was Ccleaner. And I said, you know what was funny about the DNC hack? The bad guys used Ccleaner to clean up after themselves. And at that point we went, oh dear.
So the one thing
That was a little, exactly how it was said too. Oh dear.
So I will say the one thing is I don't want to harp on Avast too much because any sort of large company could be vulnerable to these types of attacks. They were just the unfortunate victim of not having, a proper network plan or network security plan in place at that particular moment. This could have happened to a Cisco. This could have happened to a Microsoft. So I wouldn't say I would inherently distrust any one particular product. But the one thing I will say, if you are some sort of system admin, is that when you're creating kind of your gold image that you're going to use across multiple different workstations, just ask yourself, is this software that the end user actually needs, or is this something that could be cut out? Where most people, they're going to need maybe Microsoft Word, or they're going to need some certain Outlook products. But if it's something like this that you really don't need on there, you shouldn't be having it on your corporate network or on your corporate workstation. I think that's kind of the best way to think about things, and that goes across multiple things and multiple different products.
There's a question over here.
What's some of the issue also that it wasn't necessarily the version that was initially in the image, but that they had turned on the auto update, so when the update got hacked, that's how it got unlocked?
Yes. We actually saw that technique used earlier that year in the Nyteya case, where for 3 hours, the update server for the MEDOC accounting software was redirected to a box in OVH with a Let's Encrypt certificate. So if you're following along at home,
Did it have a Let's Encrypt?
OVH
Okay.
and Let's Encrypt are not your friends. We have 5 minutes left. Who wants to ask any crazy thoughts? Anybody want to hear about what I think about what's in Area 51? No? Area 51 is great. They have bad cheeseburgers.
He thinks it's aliens. He loves aliens.
I don't want to say it's aliens, but it's aliens. Any other questions, comments, suggestions? Will also be available right after this talk. If you want to talk to us on a one. Oh, yes, sir.
So after that, basically the understanding I got is that the application is absolutely necessary for whatever you should be added. However, moving forward in the future, if there were applications to track it, but you weren't necessarily sure about it, what steps would you take to absolutely make sure that it was safe
Well, you've got to understand, the question was, what would you do about applications in the future to keep them safe, right? And that is an actual great question. And here's the problem. In both of the Ccleaner and the MEDOC case, the application that was distributed were good. It was the update functionality that pushed down a bad update for both of them. So if you're looking to keep a manifest of well-tested and known good binaries by checksum, that's only as useful as until a new update comes out. Personally, I'm a paranoid person, so I would disable auto update on applications in general. I would have a isolated sandbox-like environment where updates are downloaded, applied, and tested. I wouldn't just test for operations. I would test for suspicious network behavior. You're looking for anomalies in network behavior. After that passes a soak-in period, bundle it and push it via whatever update method you have for your organization. And everybody, there's so many different update methodologies. Take your pick. But I would make sure that I am the one distributing the auto update, not an external vendor. Once you have somebody that can go from your box through your perimeter defense, grab a piece of code, download it locally and execute it, you've created basically your own backdoor there. Don't create your own backdoor.
So I want to say, I think that's what we would like to do in every particular ideal case. However, I want to say, we do acknowledge that there are some businesses where you don't really get to have that much say. So my thing is, try to do your best to work with your management, with your CTO, and try to have a good policy in place to say, hey, if we want to start adding additional software, you need to be known that there is a potential security risk, or there is always a greater exposure because of that stuff. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is say that if your boss comes in and tells you, you need to install this right now, 99% of the system admins are going to say, okay, cool. But it's one of those things where we kind of want to do our best, or at least I want to do my best to protect some of these newer or lower level people, so that way if it does fall down, you're not the one holding the bag. You can say, well, my management told me to do so, and at least then, you're not the one who's stuck at the end.
Thank you for coming. Like I said, we'll be available right outside the door for additional questions, comments. If you just want to talk about other stuff, we'll be right outside the door. Thank you very much for coming, and we love feedback.